Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint, Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Orla and I'm delighted to be joined by Wes Hackett and Suzy Dean from Add-in 365 in the UK, who will present the topic, what is the Viva Connections Dashboard and when should I use it? Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC22. Don't forget to check out the Resource Centre. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit sharepointeurope.com and click the content link at the top. Continue your learning by joining us for our next webinar, Service Principles and Managed Identities, How to Properly Secure Your Azure Resources. That's with Shannon Kuhn on Wednesday, October the 12th, 2022 from 15 to 16 CEST. Find out more and register at sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. Our ESPC 22 early bird sale is now on. Save €200 on 3- and 4-day tickets. Find out more at sharepointeurope.com, but hurry as today is the final day. Today, September the 29th, 2022. Why should you attend ESPC 22? Watch the video on our homepage to hear pre-event insights from Jeff Teeper, President of Collaborative Apps and Platforms at Microsoft. Check it out now at sharepointeurope.com. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any question you have in the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Centre, where you'll be notified by email when it's available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our presenters, Wes and Suzy. Hello, Wes. Hello, Suzy.
Hi, Orla. I'll begin my screen share.
Perfect. We can see your slides now. Thanks a million.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for joining us this morning to talk about the Viva Connections Dashboard and how that can be used. I'm joined by Wes Hackett, who's our CTO and also Microsoft 365 MVP. Wes looks after the technology function at Add-in 365 and also oversees our consulting practice. My name's Suzy Dean. I'm the Chief Executive at Add-in 365 and also a Microsoft 365 MVP. In terms of an agenda for the next hour, we're going to give a very quick introduction to Add-in 365, and then we're going to look at what the Viva Connections Dashboard is. We're then going to look at some of the core use cases and also think about the approach for understanding how to identify your use cases when it comes to the Viva Connections Dashboard. Wes is then going to take us through how Viva Connections dashboards can be designed and built. And then we're going to look at how the Viva Connections dashboard fits into a normal project lifecycle for intranet or digital workplace. Because we know from conversations with organisations, it's thrown some people in terms of how exactly that gets folded into a normal project structure. We haven't been given anybody's information for this event, so we have no idea if those interested are developers, IT pros, IT managers, program managers, and so the split of the next hour is going to be when we look at the Viva Connections Dashboard and what it is, more contextual. The core use cases should appeal to everybody. Wes's segment on how you design and build a dashboard tile is very much aimed at our developer audience. And then the project lifecycle section, where we look at how it's worked into an IT project, is probably of interest to IT managers and program managers that might be joining us. As Orla said, please do ask questions throughout, and we'd love to pick those up as we go. So a very quick introduction to Add-in 365. We're a Microsoft managed charter partner, and we hold charter partner status in business applications and content services, which for those not familiar with the program means we're recognised for our products and our understanding of information architecture and content management. We do work directly with Microsoft SharePoint teams and Viva product groups. We're really proud of that partnership. because it's allowed us to shape wider thinking in the community about how those services have been developed and used more generally. And organisationally, we're very much focused on SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, and Viva experiences. Generally, you don't come to Add-in 365 if you're trying to do a mailbox migration or set up your security function or anything like that. We do speak very regularly at Microsoft's conferences, so Ignite, Inspire, and we also do a lot in the UK with communications institutions like the Institute of Internal Communications and EBM, and we do that because we have found that often in organisations, it's business stakeholders in marketing and communications that lead the charge in terms of designing what these new digital employee experiences should be. So it's important that we understand what those stakeholders want and need, but equally, without a strong basis in the technology, it would be very hard to do that. And so we spend as much time focused on working with Microsoft and the technology community. We are very pleased to say that the digital employee experience we have designed and delivered for Wincanton has been nominated for Best Employee Experience Campaign at the Institute of Internal Comms Awards this year. And they're a client that is also using some of the dashboard tiles that we're going to be looking at today. The guidance we're going to share in the next hour isn't really born of us working in a particular sector or size of organisation. We have some very, very large organisations that we're lucky enough to count as our customers, like WPP, and then we have smaller organisations as well that are just a few hundred big. And they range in sector from financial services to engineering, finance. I think what unites all these organisations is that they want to get the best use out of the Microsoft technologies they're invested in. And we're going to hopefully show you today how you can do that with the Viva Connections Dashboard. Do get in touch with us if you like what you hear today and you're thinking yourselves of designing your digital employee experiences, whether you're looking to do discoveries, information architecture sessions, revamping your intranet. We do have more than 50 ready to go Viva Connections dashboard tiles available. That's of course the subject matter today. And we are also an organisation that delivers Teams governance and rollout as well. We've delivered a number of new digital employee experiences in 2022. Agri is one of those organisations, and we have delivered a number of dashboard tiles for them. They're going to be joining us at an Add-in 365 webinar on November the 11th to tell their story. And if you're attending the European SharePoint conference, they're actually going to be taking to the stage with us on Tuesday to tell their story as well. But we do work, as I said, across a number of other sectors to deliver Viva Connections dashboard tiles as well. So as I said, we are going to be at ESPC. We've got Agri with us telling their story on Tuesday at 3:15, and I'm also going to be running an in conversation with Jeff Teeper at our booth on the Tuesday lunchtime. So do come over and check that out if you're attending the event. So let's start by having a very quick 3-minute look at what the Viva Connections dashboard is. And let's start by contextualizing that in terms of what Viva Connections itself is. So Viva Connections is almost multifaceted. It can refer to any number of things. At its most basic level, within Teams, we're able to bring our intranet or SharePoint site through into the Teams UI. And this is a capability that's been enabled by Viva Connections. So this tends to be a good sort of 101 starting point for organisations looking to dip their toes into using Viva Connections. And you can see here that through this UI, I can actually browse around the site. From SharePoint here, Viva Connections also gives us a flyout panel from the left. This presents to us our navigation, my sites, both those that I visit frequently and those that I follow. It gives me a view of news that's been recommended for me, a view of my files, and also a view of my lists. So again, this is something that Viva Connections gives us. And as I move through my site, you'll see that's all pervasive. So that follows me around wherever I am in SharePoint. Very, very useful if as an employee I'm want to keep going back to core sites that mean something to me in what's otherwise quite a busy digital environment. Viva Connections also gives us a number of web components. So here within my employee experience, you can see that I have the feed for Viva Connections, and this is pulling through communications from Yammer and SharePoint. These are communications in Yammer communities that I happen to be a member of, and that's living alongside news stories, and I can like and I can share news stories from here, including sharing those news stories into Yammer communities that might be of interest. So a sort of scenario here that this might be useful is if I've read a SharePoint news article, I think it's going to be of interest to one of the communities that I'm a member of, and so I can, from my news Viva Connections feed, ping this particular story into that Yammer group. And you can see that here now within Yammer. And then we get to the Viva Connections dashboard, which on the desktop manifests a little bit like a web part, and this can take me through to any number of content areas that the organisation has chosen to surface to me. So we've seen there that I've gone through to some location information in SharePoint, but I can also go to tasks, and my onboarding buddy, because I'm new to this organisation, is Wes. And so you can see here that I've been taken through directly to Teams to start my call with him. But I won't start that call now. So the Viva Connections dashboard tile has a presence as a web component normally on home. And lastly, Viva Connections also gives us this boost function, so we can actually promote and highlight specific SharePoint stories to the top of our feed for a period of time that works for us. And if we then move through and take a look at what the mobile view looks like, this gives us another dimension on that same content. So here we have the Viva Connections mobile experience, which many of you on the call will know is really an app package that's run over the Teams mobile app. So we have here the name of my digital employee experience, our Viva Connections dashboard tiles, our universal feed, and resources, which is our SharePoint navigation. So if we have a look here at my dashboard tiles, it might be that I'm the member of sales team looking after a client, Team Fizz, and I'm out on the road a lot on site with my client. But I have quick access from here to my Team Fizz portal. I can see the latest campaigns we're running for that client. I can quickly gather information on that particular client's location if I need to get a move on to their office. And I can see in real time some feedback that's been provided by the client about our performance. So I'm never caught out unknowing of the latest information to do with my client. But it's not just by role. In my second example here, we have the Viva Connections dashboard, and this time it's being configured for me as a new employee. From my dashboard, I can get into my guide for week 3 and understand the specific activities that I should be participating in based on my status as a new employee. I can see here my SharePoint navigation, which has been honed specifically for me because of my role and the fact that I'm new to the organisation. So I see a different architecture than people who have been in the organisation longer than me. And lastly, from my dashboard, I'm also able to contact Wes, who's my onboarding buddy. So this is now looking at the mobile view of what I've just demonstrated to you on the desktop. So it exists in both places. The dashboard on the desktop looks more like a web part. And then here on the mobile, it is that sort of first view when you go to the Viva Connections mobile app, and I can interact directly in this example with Wes from here. So that's a quick overview of what Viva Connections dashboard tiles actually are within the context of Viva Connections. I'll hand over to Wes, who's going to talk us through some of the core use cases for the Viva Connections dashboard and really how to approach defining and understanding what that is.
Cool. Thanks, Suzy. So it's very, very easy to approach the Viva Connections dashboard like a quick links web part. So if you think about a standard intranet homepage, often has historically been a collection of 50 to 100 to 150 different URL clicks that go off to various parts of a systems ecosystem in an organization. And there are dashboard tiles that can just replicate that as click here, go off to the destination. But really, taking that approach, you've missed out on the huge value opportunity that the Viva dashboard gives us. And the value opportunity is to be actionable, is to take direct integrations with those systems that an employee will be using and allow them to action something through the dashboard. So in the same way that our mobile phone home screens have a collection of apps that we've specifically pulled together to suit who we are and what we like to do on our phone, an organization needs to approach the dashboard in the same way. It needs to think about what are the applications, and more importantly, what are the use cases for those applications that we want to put into the hands of our employees through mainly a mobile device. So this works, this capability works beautifully in a first line non-desk based role. But as you saw in Suzy's demonstration, also features in the SharePoint ecosystem in the same way, so can satisfy an HQ versus a first line worker in equal measure. So you need to think about aligning to personas or roles in the organization. So this doesn't need to be an infinite number of different sort of Venn diagrams of audiences, but if you take those two big ticket audiences, you've got people that sit at laptops or desktop computers, and you've got people that are primarily phone orientated. That's an easy starting point. If you separate your population into those two buckets, you can then drill that down into those that consume information, i.e., they might be a shift manager who's really watching metrics, KPIs for that particular shift, versus somebody in the shift who is trying to get live updates on some information, being able to report the status of certain activities they're performing. One of the organizations we recently delivered a first line worker experience to, they have vehicle checks. So the dashboard for somebody that's in a frontline working scenario can be tailored to support the activities that they're trying to do. So if you imagine there is an engineer working in a gas supply context, their primary device is their iPhone. They're logging into Teams, they see the dashboard. The dashboard's going to understand where they are because we have location capabilities. It's going to be able to understand the time of day from the use. It's going to understand who the person is that's looking at it, and it's going to understand the activities that they're potentially scheduled upon. So in that engineer's case, we can have all of that inferred knowledge bleeding through into the dashboard experience. So something as simple as a vehicle checklist. So I'm going to go drive a Ford Transit van. I need to check the tire pressures, I need to check the washer fluid, I need to check that I've got my high vis, I need to check I've got my safety equipment, I need to check the tooling in the back, I need to check my supplies. All of that can be contextualized, and then we can overlay, well, you're in this location, which means the depot is probably this one because that's the closest. You're in this location and it's 9 o'clock in the evening, and the weather forecast for that location is snow. So we need to advise you an additional set of checks and measures to help you stay safe. And we can turn that dashboard from quick links into something that actually makes a lot of sense to the person using it. So when you're sort of identifying scenarios and you're identifying the use cases for dashboards, you don't have to go after the whole population of the organization. You can really say, we have a group, 150, 200 people in the organization where collecting together their scenarios will really turn the dial for their experience, rather than hopping between different apps or emailing or phoning or text messaging, or worse still, non-corporate activity like WhatsApp groups to do communications. We can bring that stuff together through the dashboard to allow them to kind of see everything they need at their fingertips. So first line workers scenarios often cluster around things like job guides and steps. So, how do I perform that pipeline replacement? How do I secure a farm field when I'm digging a trench through it and there's cattle? You've got key processes that I need to follow from a safety perspective. So if I'm scheduled on a job, the job can understand the processes that need to be highlighted to me. The location guides, so if I am going to a field where we've got permission to dig, I can have all of that at my fingertips. So if somebody from the council comes along and says, show me your permit, that permit's brought to me rather than me going to find it. Vehicle operations I just spoke about. And if you've got things in the context of deliveries and supplies and materials arriving, you can expose all of those things. So what you've done is, instead of that person needing to walk across your vast library of activities and vast library of content and vast sets of systems, you've put the energy and effort into saying, okay, let me bring all of that stuff to you in a basket called the dashboard and drop it in front of you on your phone, making sure that everything you're probably going to need to know is right there at your fingertips. So dashboard for first line worker is kind of very, very job centric, activity centric.
And it sounds, Wes, like when you're approaching using the Viva Connections dashboard in this way, you're really supporting this first line worker to do their jobs. And certainly where we've been working with organisations to deliver this, the business driver behind that has been, we want to retain our very valuable first line workers. We don't want to lose them to the competition. And so they're seeing a specific Viva Connections dashboard experience for that audience as a way of retaining their people and also getting them up to speed quickly when they're onboarding. To the description you've just given, Wes, if this information is somewhere across my technology estate, probably in multiple systems, as a new employee, I've got to get to know all of those and where they are. And that's before I consider how easy it would be to consume that information from my mobile device.
Yeah, absolutely. It is all about really hiding the borders and the lines between the technologies and the processes, and actually putting yourself in that person's shoes and going, right, if I'm stood in the field, it's raining, it's 10 a.m. in the morning and I'm waiting for a delivery, what's most contextual to me? How do I get that information to that person in the easiest format that they need it? And those tiles and the implementation you put behind them is solving those problems. It's not, as I would suggest, it's furthest away from, it's just a link, or it's another pop-up with another set of links and those kind of experiences. Okay, so that's kind of some insight into how you approach something like a first line worker, non-desk based organization role. If we think about another common grouping of the employee population is sellers, people that face to the customer, people that are promoting and actually doing the commercial business of selling your services, your products to customers. So Microsoft themselves have released Viva Sales, which does some integrations to Dynamics 365 and or other main CRM platforms. But that isn't the only story around selling. So That gives us access to things like customer information. It gives us access to in the flow of work experiences like, I want to mention this customer, I've got a bit of insight, here's some email content, it's actionable there and then that sends through. So the dashboard, of course, plays a part in that. And you saw from Viva Sales that the dashboard experience is part of it. But then we've got things like management information. What do you want to expose to a particular sales individual versus a group of sales individuals around selling performance? Are we tracking targets? Do we need to go after special offers? Are the product lines that we're selling the right product lines for what we're trying to achieve as a quarterly target? So you can expose and thus prompt and remind a seller through the dashboard of where the lens of focus for the selling organization elements is for that period of time. Alongside this, huge investment organizations have recently made around helping somebody that is working remotely, hybrid work, customers being in hybrid stance, with content that would have traditionally been you turned up with a piece of paper or you turned up with a booklet that you gave to somebody and said, hey, here's our brochure, take this brochure away, let me know what you want to purchase from it. So brochureware, exposing information about products and services to the sales team when they need it. So again, if you combine things like, okay, I've got an appointment booked with this particular customer, it's going to be Teams call, having the dashboard tile understand that and be able to say, well, not only am I going to promote you the sales opportunity sort of brochure content that you would expect to need, but I'm going to understand the format that's best provided. So if you've got a Teams meeting and it knows you've got that Teams meeting set up, being able to digitally provide the link to PDFs that you can share or sites that you can invite that customer into, because obviously guest interaction is totally possible in M365. Brochureware becomes much more intelligent. Behind that is the MI of usage. So again, when you're combining that SharePoint Online experience where that content might be hosted and understanding its usage, you can feed that back into the brochure because you can be promoting content that is new, content that's been boosted, content that is the focus for the quarter as well as what you might need. Combine that with playbooking, another big trend, with quite a churn in this space in many organizations, people moving roles, people promoting internally and leaving, coming, going across organization boundaries, capturing how do we provide a consistent, well thought through experience for our customer and play that back to the seller when they need it. That playbook experience, again, can, if it's woven into that CRM capability, can actually understand where we are in the cycle, who we're talking to, present the information around the playbook content that helps us, capture that DNA of who we are and how we sell. So selling opportunities there is another set of scenarios.
And it's worth saying the roles that you have in your organisation may not even be as cleanly cut as this. So Agri, who are taking the stage with us at ESPC and who are going to be speaking at our webinar on November the 11th, their first line workers are their sellers who are out in fields. And so in their scenario, they've got this hybrid of information related to the act of selling, but also information related to performing jobs whilst out in the field where they're taking soil samples and things. Location guides, they need those as well. So really think broadly about this. Don't necessarily sort of think about traditional sales frontline worker. Be authentic to your organisation and the things people actually tell you they need when they're working.
Yeah. So obviously there's lots and lots of groups of scenarios. So the third and final one I was sort of mentioned this morning is project management, because this role, in my opinion, has never been harder. Because of the very diverse kind of location that people now are in. It's, huddling is no longer really that practical. So when you think about project management and making sure that everybody's on the same page, there are layers to that. There's the local team working on the local package of work, which might be part of a wider program. So they need to understand processes, they need to understand revisions to the process, they need to get those updates as those revisions happen. We need MI brought to us about the project status, so dashboarding things like the RAGs and risk registers, allowing a project manager a snapshot insight into the portfolio that they might be managing, bringing them deliverable timelines. So if there's plans and if there's activities, what are the current statuses? Are we making the check gate that we're aiming for? Are we ahead? Are we behind? The idea is to give that project management responsibility the boost it needs to actually manage the exceptions. If everything's going great and all the board is green, there's very little to do. But as soon as things start going amber or red, we want to mobilize. So if we see a particular activity and we know that's a process and we know there's a pathway that's recommended if things go amber, it's promoting that. It says, hey, project management, we can see the status of this thing, it's gone amber. If you click here, and you can choose to instigate the mitigation, and then that process can kick off, and that might send loads of Teams notifications. So again, project management's got a lot of opportunity for Viva dashboard experiences.
Thank you, Wes. So we're just at the halfway point, going to turn our attention to when should the dashboard be deployed within a project cycle. And then Wes is going to talk through from the developer's standpoint, how do you go about designing and building dashboard tiles? So let's turn our attention to when we should think about deploying the Viva Connections dashboard. I think there's two scenarios that we're seeing. We're seeing organisations that have a newly revamped digital workplace, intranet, digital employee experience, whatever you might want to call it. And so this is a bit of a bolt-on to something they've already got and are happy with. And then we're seeing organisations who are just embarking on a refresh of their intranet or digital workplace, and they're wondering how to incorporate this. I think in both scenarios, we would advise going back to the information you'll have gleaned during discovery phase, or that you will glean as you start your discovery phase, and looking at the requirements that have come up from the organisation, which this can help to deliver on. So when we're at In365 do discovery, we call it success definition. And something we're very careful to do is to talk to the leadership and talk to the business about some of their goals, their objectives, and some of the pains they have. And we do that in business terms rather than technology terms, because that then gives us the freedom to make a recommendation on the correct technology behind that. So, and that's really important, because clearly if you're asking the business to give you functional requirements, they're not, Viva Engage, Viva Connections, these are new things. They're not going to necessarily describe technology they've never experienced before. So I suppose there's a bit of a tip in there as well, which is if you are about to do your discovery, drive the conversation around what are your goals, what's the business trying, what's your department trying to do, rather than asking for functional requirements. So here's a very quick example of something we do after talking to 6 to 8 members of a leadership team. We sort of roll everything up into a single view of what the organisation is trying to do. And in this particular organisation, there were objectives we heard from all of the leadership team around delivering consistent, high quality communications that reach the right audience, supporting operations with accurate process guidance. And for the purposes of this webinar, I've highlighted some things in yellow that, because they've been articulated in business terms, we could align Viva Connections and the dashboard behind that to meet these specific requirements. So if you've already done your discovery, and for you this is a bit of a bolt-on to your existing intranet or digital workplace, go back to this material and try and identify where people have asked for things that are actionable and to do with their day-to-day work. And if you're about to embark on your project, when you're undertaking this work, be very careful to have a business-led dialogue so that you can align the correct part of it, correct technology behind what's there. The next step of a project process would generally be around experience design. And you might sort of think, well, why are we talking about experience design if the dashboard is the experience? but that's not quite the way it goes. The dashboard scenarios that Wes described, the dashboard that I showed at the beginning of this session, they rely on ecosystems of content to hydrate them. So if there is no point investing in Viva Connections dashboard tiles onto a CRM that nobody uses and nobody keeps up to date, for example. There is no point in having access to process information that hasn't been maintained or for which there are 7 versions. So it is really important that if you are seeing this as a bolt-on to something you've already got, you go back to the content, whichever system it lives in, to make sure it's up to date, it's being used, it's bedded in as a way of working. And if you are embarking on a digital workplace refresh, be sure to have frameworks in place that will give you the up-to-date content that you need. So let's have a quick look at an example and what I mean here. So at Adin 365, when we do these projects from fresh and we look at designing and developing SharePoint experiences, for example, we tend to start from a template, and we show these templates to organizations we work with. We iterate it with them. You can see in my department model here, we've got systems and process information, internal control information. So we go through with the organization, we iterate these templates, we brand them, we get them into the organization, and the business updates this content. It's this content that may well then hydrate the process information in the dashboard tile. So if we don't have those things in place, it becomes very, very difficult to deliver a meaningful dashboard exercise. So where does it fit in the project process? It fits very much at the point that you're satisfied there's existing content or you've created new content to hydrate those tiles. We then get on to designing dashboard tiles. So most of you on the call will be aware that there aren't fully finished, complete components for the dashboard as there are with, for example, the SharePoint web parts in SharePoint. There are some started, should we say, Wes, started dashboard tiles that you might leverage. Otherwise, you're pretty much looking at ground up. So Wes, talk us through how we might design and build some of these dashboard tiles.
Sure. Well, I'll talk about how Adin 365 approach this this space, because the dashboard technologies itself is a very, what I would class as on rails experience. There's very limited creative leverage in comparison to, say, for example, an intranet scenario where you've got lots of different capabilities that and designs that you can bring into the experience. Fundamentally, you have a design scheme which is a square or a rectangle to start, moving into a vertical rectangle as the next set of steps that can contain a more defined set of activities. So you go from card view, which is the button you see on the dashboard, into something called a quick view, which is more involved, or you link from that card view out to a link, an app, a Teams bot, or some other application that you're jumping off to. So approaching the design is kind of multifaceted. Firstly, you've got the visuals. So I am a big advocate for a consistent visual style. And that visual style might be that it sticks to your corporate branding. So you have a theme of brand color, you have a theme of brand iconography, stroke imagery, stroke photography, and that you take all of your dashboard tiling down that route. It is important to be aware that as you purchase vendor tiles, so if you're a ServiceNow consumer and you choose to implement the ServiceNow dashboard experience, they're likely to take the ServiceNow visual. And the Microsoft tiles that exist, such as the quick links and the link to a Teams app, they have a Microsoft look and feel to iconography and imagery. So it's going to end up being quite mosaic-like in terms of the visual, but that doesn't mean to say you should ignore consistent visual design. So we approach it by having a number of artifacts. We've got an entire design system built out in a platform called Figma, which is the same platform that the Teams Fluent UI and SharePoint provide toolkits for. So if you've been building SharePoint framework web parts, or Teams apps, you're very familiar with the Figma artifacts that are provided. We took that approach, we extended out into a Figma specifically for dashboard tile experiences. So I want to sort of step into the various sort of states that you can have in a tile. So if we can just jump forward to the next slide. So let's talk about the anatomy of the card. So this is the first element that you see. So they are a square container or a rectangular container, and they have various elements in it. So in this diagram, number one is the container. In light mode in Teams, it's going to be light colors. In dark mode, it's going to invert and become darker colors, black, grays, those sort of tones. So again, because this is in Teams, you need to consider light and dark mode in equal measure. SharePoint is only going to be light mode. So again, thinking about whether it's the primary use case is on the phone or on the dashboard for the HQ, and does that experience feel the same, or is again a design aesthetic you need to consider. Then we're moving into card elements. So we've got, again, item 2 there, iconography. How do you quickly through icon identify? You've got 3, which is the title of the app, and then 4, which is information specific to the app. So if we move on to next card, and then within these cards, we've got 3 varieties of card view. So we've got heading only, which you can see here is a piece of text on those card containers. The next one is, just wait for it to catch up. Heading and description. So we've got heading and a description, and then the third one is heading and image. And this is where you can start to see this is the well-being kind of icon that sits inside Viva Insights. And you can see that you choose from those layouts. And then the final one is you're choosing interactivity. So there's a card, sorry, go back for me. There's a card click, and then there's buttons, and you can have a maximum of 2 buttons on a card, and they only show 2 buttons when they're in wide format. So that's a very fixed framework that you are looking at when it comes to what does my little square or rectangle look like when it's in the dashboard experience. So it's good in some ways because it's very constrained, but that really brings out some really nice challenges, because we talked about action, and we want to do things with these cards. Like, what are the actions that we want to provide? How do we make this interactive and informative quickly? So on those landing card view pages, what are we going to do? So if we take the buddy system that you saw in Suzy's demo, the card has worked out that Suzy's looking at the card, Wes is identified as the buddy, and it's presenting 2 action buttons, which is call or IM, and it's going to immediately invoke those 2 Teams capabilities from that card. So it's incredibly actionable. It's intelligent because it works out who I am, and it's actionable directly from the card.
Yeah. And Wes, it sounds like when we started talking about how to deploy the cards, and I started by saying have that business dialogue, understand what we're trying to achieve as a business. That's why it's so critical, because if you're producing sites, for example, you're not constrained. You've got ample space, multiple areas to write lots and lots of words, but this is forcing, there's the saying, it's harder to be simple than it is to be complicated or verbose is really true, isn't it? You've got to know why you're showing people this tile and what you want them to do, because you've got very little real estate, very few potential interactions, and all of that rolls up to knowing what's the problem we're trying to solve here when we're producing this card for somebody.
Yeah. So from the card view, we launch into what's known as a quick view. So on the next slide, we've got a collection of Microsoft examples from the kind of design aesthetic point of view. Now, we're not going to dive into any specifically, but you can see there that this is all fairly well, again, constrained formatting. These are what's known in the technology circle as an adaptive card. That's a very clever technology. But again, if you want to make these things interactive, you need to think about the user experience flow as you go through the card layers? Because do you want to cram everything onto the first card that you see? Do you know, the example in the very first column is booking a holiday, and it's got my entitlement, it's got how much I've already consumed, it's how much, you know, when the next public holiday, and at the bottom it's got an actionable form for me to book something. That's on one card. The third card in is a frequently asked question, and that one drills and drills and drills and drills and drills into new views and new layers of information as we go through. And as a card designer, you take on the responsibility of working how far you go down the stack of information before you actually pop out to somewhere else. And that, again, is a very interesting problem space, because yes, you want this to be available on the phone, and you want it to be actionable, and you want it to be very quick to do the common activities, but how do you elevate that employee to somewhere more detailed, like a SharePoint site or a Teams application, when it's better that they experience that capability through those pieces? So again, as a card designer, you've got aesthetic and you've got functionality and balance of speed with the functionality that you're considering through those. And final point on kind of all of these design aspects: performance. These things have to be fast. People's expectations of, you click something, it shows you data. Their mobile phone, you know, if you open the Twitter app, it's going to have the previous feed, it's going to have a refresh button that you invoke to get the latest tweets, but there's a speed expectation that's built up. And again, when you think about consistency, the final part of consistency is across all your tiles that you deliver, the performance should feel the same. It should be a similar benchmark across all those different activities. It's no good having loads of tiles which are like one click, some information, and it's pretty quick, but then the one that actually requires me to do some inputting, submission, it takes, you know, 20 seconds to get the response to say yes, thank you. That performance will be noted by the employee, and they're probably going to lean on the SharePoint site or the third-party app that they're using instead. So your investment value obviously diminishes. Okay, deploying, final sort of point on the technical side. Deploying is dead easy, because if you've ever deployed a SharePoint framework web part, the process is the same. You stick these tiles in your enterprise app catalog, and once the home page, the home site, the dashboard in Viva Connections deployment steps are complete, the dashboard is there. You're simply installing that tile into that site and adding it to the dashboard in the position you want it, setting the audiences that it should show up for, and you're done. So from an enterprise security point of view, your considerations are what it connects to, but the deployment mechanic is the well-trodden path of SharePoint framework.
And presumably your Active Directory needs to be up to date. We talked about these being most powerful when they're targeted towards roles, behaviours, things we need people to do. Have you got any guidance on that?
Yeah, the big guidance, which is slightly controversial, stop worrying about Active Directory cleanliness and start worrying about community and team membership, because they make beautiful audiences. If you're driving Viva Engage usage in the organization, and you're standing up communities of practice, communities of interest, communities around projects, those groups can be used as audiences on the tiles. So if I'm a member of the new employee group that HR have added me to as I start, my tiles are going to be influenced by that membership. They're going to show up for me until such time as I leave the Neo experience. The same goes for teams. Teams memberships can be used to target tiles. They're self-nominating because the team owner decides who's in the team. So the fear factor around my AD's in a mess, which, you know, is sometimes a perception, sometimes reality. There's a lot more value in going down the self-nominated route in Yama communities and teams to use for the audience targets.
Thank you for that, Wes. We'll sort of take the last 5 minutes or so to talk about communications and launch. So how should we be thinking about deploying the tiles? We should be starting by understanding what the business needs are in non-technical terms. That will allow us to align the right technologies to meeting the need, whether those are SharePoint sites, Viva Connections Dashboard tiles, Viva Engage communities, or something else. Once we understand that, we need to hydrate and create those experiences underneath so that the experiences we want to deliver on are content rich, they're up to date. And then we need to get into designing and developing our dashboard tiles, which Wes has just talked us through. At that point, we're in a position to do our communications and launch. And we've had some interesting experiences through this year, because in 3 of the organisations we've delivered this, the dashboard tiles to, the first line workers had only recently had their Microsoft licenses purchased for them. So there wasn't already an engagement with the Microsoft 365 platform for these individuals, and therefore the communications and launch needed to factor in installing the Teams mobile app to people's devices, then explaining at a high level what it was they were looking at before communicating about the specifics of the dashboard. And so a large part of those communications and launch activities were offline. They weren't email users. These people didn't have 365 licenses. So I think that the first point on communications and launch is consider your starting point. If you are producing dashboard tiles for people that are already using Outlook, potentially Teams and other things, that's a very different strategy that needs to be put together than if you have to get people to put these things on their phones to start with, and you can't fall back on email as a means of communication because you don't organisationally normally communicate with them through that channel. And to that end, we need to consider what's going to have the biggest reach to the intended audience. If you are in the scenario that 3 of our clients have been this year, where there isn't anything in place already, a combination of going through human beings. In most scenarios, there are shift managers, warehouse managers, and they do stand-ups and briefings, and using that human factor as a channel through which to communicate the new capabilities becomes important, as do offline assets such as posters. And in one scenario, we even did a £250 Sainsbury's voucher or supermarket voucher to get people to take the steps we required in order to make use of the app. So you have to think quite creatively about that. And I think if you're joining this call as an IT practitioner, this might feel a world away from what you normally do, but there is a requirement here to consider that. If, however, you're talking to a community that's already digitally enabled, then the 3 sort of streams we tend to follow when it comes to communications is firstly focusing on the pain we're resolving, secondly drilling down to what's in it for you, so what's tangibly going to make a difference, and then expanding out to the bigger picture. If we do this, what else might we be able to do in the future? The channel strategy, I mentioned it in the last 15 minutes, it is really, really important to develop those ecosystems. If you want to use Viva Connections beyond the dashboard, you want to make use of things like that universal feed, clearly regularly published SharePoint news, vibrant communities are all really important underpinnings to the success of that. And therefore, in collaboration with the business, making sure you've got channel strategies to develop and maintain those ecosystems is really important as well. So please do get in touch with Admin 365 if you're looking to invest in Viva Connections Dashboard tiles. We do have a whole bunch ready to go. If you're looking to revamp your digital employee experience, or you're considering Teams governance and rollouts, these are all things that we do day to day for all sorts of different organisations. Otherwise, we thank you very much for taking part. Orla, I don't know if we've got any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Suzy and Wes. That was fantastic. As Suzy said, if you have a question, go ahead and type it into the questions window. We do have one here. Suzy, can you tell us a bit more about Viva dashboard tiles that you have run for Agri?
it might be a little bit of a spoiler if we give them all away before the webinar on November the 11th and then at ESPC itself. But Wes, perhaps you can expand back and talk to some of the challenges they had and therefore the areas in which their dashboard tiles are going to focus.
Yeah, sure. So Agri have a population of what's known as an agronomist, which is fundamentally a scientist that understands soil fertility and products that can boost and reduce that experience. And they have a information management system with over 400,000 content items. And it's very important that an agronomist can get into the right area of that body of content, find labels, fertilizer product information, soil sample data, and all those kind of scientific pieces of information. So one of the sort of big heavy use ticket items they've got on their dashboard is exposing content in the context of what that agronomist is trying to do. So it understands their location awareness, their role, who they're meeting, and presents to them guides into that agronomy content. So that's a very, very heavily used dashboard experience. Another one I'd mention was the employee onboarding. Keeping and retaining talent is important to the organisation. Agronomists are few and far between. So making sure that they get the support that they need, because they're primarily a field-based operation, and bringing them into the fold of well-being and those kind of things as well is something that features in that experience.
That is great, Wes. Thanks so much. There are no more questions, so I guess that's the end of the webinar. Thanks, Wes and Suzy, for taking the time today. We really appreciate it.
And on November the 11th and at ESPC, Derek Wilson, who's the CIO at Agri, will be taking to the stage to explain how all this has gone in his own words. Brilliant. Fantastic. Okay.
That is great. Thanks again, guys, and thanks everybody for attending today. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Centre, and I'll let you know when it's available by email. Thanks again. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.